Attention is in short supply these days, yet it is important to executive function, doing well in school, and overall life success. Hi, I'm Jeff Coleman, and this is Attention, ladies and gentlemen, a show for teachers and parents who want to learn more about attention and what we can do to help our children be more successful in school and life. So if I could have your attention, we will get started. Hey, before we get started today, I wanted to tell you about a fun way to train attention skills from our show's sponsor, Brainly. Where you look and where you are planning to look is where you are placing your attention. The Attention Arcade leverages this connection to train attention skills with specially designed video games that children control using only their eyes. You can learn more by going to attentionarcade.com. Welcome to Attention, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very excited to have Dr. Jeanne Townsend joining us today. Dr. Townsend is a neuroscientist at the University of California, San Diego, and she has been studying attention for a very long time. Welcome, Jeanne.
Yes. Thank you, Jeff. I'm happy to talk with you about attention.
So if you could tell our audience a little bit about how you got into research and how what attracted you about attention and why you thought it was very interesting.
So as you said, I've been doing this research for a very long time, 30 plus years. I got my degree, my doctorate is actually in clinical psychology with a specialization in neuropsychology. So during the course of that, I studied attention in graduate school, and it just became very interesting to me because it's an extremely basic skill that is a scaffold or supports a lot of other cognitive function. For example, you really can't remember anything without attention. So it is basic to human behavior, and I guess it just interested me.
So that's really interesting. Why is attention important to remembering things?
So if you have ever tried, for example, to remember a phone number, there are different tricks to doing it. You have to repeat it, but you absolutely can't do it unless you're paying attention to those numbers. Okay. And that's true of almost anything else. Now, there are some different kinds of memory that are subconscious. There's memory priming and that sort of thing that are require only low-level attention and processing. But basically, anything you're going to remember, you have to pay attention to. It's a big problem in school for children, for example.
Sure.
Teachers work at getting their students to pay attention because if they're distracted, they miss all of the information. And if they're attending to their neighbors or shooting spitwads or something, they're not attending.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about the research you've done over the years and what you've learned about attention and, typical and atypical attention, and we'd love to hear more.
Okay. So most of my research has been with autism spectrum disorder, although I have studied other developmental disorders, including developmental language disorders, and a little bit about ADHD, but mostly ADHD in association with autism. Okay. I've also studied attention in older adults and what happens to attention as we age, but that's a slightly different track. So one of the things that's interesting about attention and development, well, let me start by saying what I think attention is, because it's kind of a vague word. You absolutely know what it means when you say pay attention. You mean for whoever you're talking to look at something or listen to something that's going to happen. Right. Teachers do that often in class. So you kind of know what that is, but basically it's that all the time you're bombarded with a huge amount of sensory information. Lots of sights, lots of sounds, touch, smell, taste. You can't possibly process all of it to the same degree. Okay. So attention is that filter that tells you what you need to focus on, helps you to decide very, very quickly what needs to be your focus. And at the same time, You have to be able to shift attention quickly. If something changes in your environment that you need to pay attention to, you're walking down the street and a car comes across when you're about to step out the curb, you need to have some attention to the rest of your surroundings, even if your focus is something different. And so attention, again, is that filter that helps you decide what matters and where you should be focused, where your processing energy should be focused at any given time.
Well, if I can interrupt for a second, you said
Sure.
we're bombarded by lots of information and sensations all the time. So this isn't just a social media problem. This is something that humans have had to deal with for a long time. You're talking outside of the computers and everything we deal with that.
Absolutely. In a way, computers simplify the problem because they give you a focus. It's an external focus. And if you're looking at a computer screen, there may be multiple things in the computer screen. But right now, distracting sounds for me are shut out because of these headphones, right? And I am looking at this screen, and although I'm aware of other surroundings around me, there's a lot of other visual stimulation in my environment and in yours right now, but I'm focused on you. On the other hand, if there was a bright flash or if something happened in my environment to really change the sensory stimulation, it would capture my attention. And then I would shift very, very quickly, and that's hugely important. Now, in a social situation, particularly if you're in a group of people or if you're in a classroom, there's a lot of both auditory and visual stimulation particularly, and you have to be able, if you're talking with a group of people, you have to be able to shift attention very quickly from one person to another. I might be talking to you and looking at you, and another person says something, and I immediately shift my attention, and usually my eyes and turn my head to that person. This all happens, that attentional shift happens so fast. It happens in milliseconds. It is some of it is just automatic. Things capture your attention, and some of it's on purpose. I intend to shift my attention to this. So that has always been necessary, and that problem has always been with us. So. Now, developmental, what happens now, when attention is working properly, which is what I just described, then you're able to focus on the most important thing in current environment, and you're also able to change quickly. So you have control of that process so that you function well. There are things that disturb that process. And some of those are developmental things. So certain diseases, for example, affect attention, and it's a huge problem. So for example, after a stroke, certain kinds of stroke, some people are unable to pay attention to one side of space. Some kind of posterior strokes. In developmental disorders, attention is very commonly affected, and we think to some degree we may know how that starts in autism. We know a little bit about it in ADHD, for example. Children either just simply are inattentive, they don't pay attention to what's going on around them very well, or they are hyperactive and distractible. I mean, there are different varieties of ADHD. The studies I've done in autism have identified a number of specific problems that are common in autism. In autism spectrum disorder, symptoms vary widely, and the features that go with this disorder, as all parents and teachers who work with kids on the spectrum know, every child is an individual, and the features are slightly different. But some attentional problems are common. One of these is a difficulty shifting attention about. So they're slow to shift attention about. A substantial number of children on the autism spectrum also have ADHD features, and again, those can be include hyperactivity, inattentiveness or distractibility. So those are really common problems, and they very much affect the way children behave. Now, if you think about what I've been saying about attention, if you have problems with attention early in development, so one of the first things that's noticeable in a child who's going to be diagnosed with autism is they might not move their attention around at all. They kind of get stuck, hung on something. And so when that happens, it's very hard to get them to move their attention. This is obviously a huge developmental problem because the way children learn about their environment is to move their attention around. So let's just take a small example, learning language, for example. Parents often, the way you build a child's vocabulary is you point at something, that's a dog. And the child sees this dog running across the lawn and learns to identify that as an object that has this name associated with it, dog.
Right.
That's a ball. If the ball is moving and a child is not able to shift attention from whatever he or she was focused on previously, if they aren't able to follow that gesture and see that animal before it's run away, then it's going to take them a long time to learn what a dog is. And so that really affects the development of language. Also affects social skills because, as I described, social things move very fast. People change expressions fast on their face. You learn to identify those expressions with what they're saying and the tone of their voice. So very young children know when mom or dad are mad, right? Or if they're stern and want you to do something, or if they're happy and smiling. If you don't shift your attention very quickly, you miss part or all of a change in expression, and you don't associate the tone of the voice with the expression. And so things that should be integrated and go together to help you understand social behavior are missing, or they take a long time to learn because you just need to be in position to see those changes. Social environment in a group, say a group of children, moves very fast. Kids don't stay still. They're running around, they're moving, they're laughing. All sorts of things are going on. And if you can't change your attention quickly to keep up with what's going on in the group, that affects your social behavior. That also affects the way other children treat you, and it even affects the way your parents treat you. So if I'm a child who has difficulty moving my attention very quickly, and you smile at me and I miss the smile, so I don't return the smile, I'm not rewarding you for smiling at me. I don't smile back. You're not. It's a vicious cycle. So they miss a lot of things. Now, eventually, I think most kids on the spectrum do catch up with a lot of that. But those early experiences are huge, and they are difficult to overcome. So that's it.
And is there, I mean, as part of your research, do we understand why attention problems start to surface? What's behind it?
So there actually are some interesting models. One of the more interesting one is developed by a researcher named Joe Piven. And the Piven model takes you all the way from genetics to behavior. And let me vastly oversimplify this and not do it justice, but we don't have time. So it starts with, we know a lot about genetic differences in autism and how they might lead to some of the features in autism. So there's a genetic basis for a really early childhood overgrowth of some parts of the brain, particularly in the frontal cortex, the front part of the brain. That growth happens earlier than there are windows of brain development, and those windows and the timing are actually very important, because what happens as your brain in a baby develops is they develop kind of on a schedule, and that drives brain connections that are made, say from visual centers in the brain to frontal cortex where you're going to use that visual information. Okay? Or you're going to use it to direct gaze. Some of those major connections are the pathways that support attention or that drive attention. And those are long pathways in the brain, all the way from the back of the head and visual cortex to the front auditory cortex to the front of the brain that drive behavior. And of course, there's a lot of other subcortical support too. So anyway, when that timing is off, so if there's this early overgrowth, and you can only see that in very, very young babies that are going to later receive the diagnosis of autism, then those connections don't form when they should. And so you have some differences in the connectivity from the front of the brain to the back of the brain, and those connections are what drive attention. And so again, the good news about that is the brain is really plastic. And so for all of your life, including when you reach advanced age, you can do things to change those connections. Following an injury, you can make new connections. So it's one of the reasons that different kinds of training and therapy really work in autism spectrum disorder. And you can train attention. And if you do that, you're making new connections in the brain, or you're reinforcing weak connections that were there but weren't quite strong enough. And so you actually can change things physically, structurally. It takes a long time. Anyway, that overgrowth, again, leads to faulty connection, long-distance connections, and causes people who have that problem to process a little bit differently. So they might process more local visual information more locally, which in some ways is a strength because they're great at detail. So they see a lot of visual detail that you might not see or that I might not see. Some people are spectacular at counting items, for example, that sort of thing. You can do it with a glance. It's a different focus and a different kind of processing. But harder for them is the sort of integration that you need, and again, control of attention, which means something sensory gets processed in your visual cortex, and that information doesn't get to frontal cortex in a very timely fashion, so it doesn't affect your behavior as fast as it should. Is that clear? Anyway,
mostly that's a lot of information, and but yeah, I appreciate how you're explaining it and simplifying it for us. But you said something in there that we can continue to build and strengthen those connections in the brain. That brings me to the fact that you were involved in the early research that later became the Attention Arcade with Brain Leap. Can you tell us how you came up with this idea, and why you thought it would work, and what you saw in the research?
So it was a combination of things. I'd studied attention for a long time, and I wanted to try to turn that into something useful. Often researchers are faced with doing something basic that's more along the lines of basic science, and you publish an academic paper and maybe some other researchers read it, and then it doesn't have any practical value. And in the case of autism, I guess I wanted to try to do something to change this behavior. And I thought, because of what I just said earlier, the brain is very plastic, and even adults can learn. Now, obviously, given what I said earlier, this would be much more effective in very young children, because if you can improve attentional skills in very young children, you kind of interrupt this developmental cascade that I described earlier, where you miss things, and so that has repercussions. It affects the way other people see you and the way you interact with other people, and so on and so forth. So if you can stop it early, you can make a huge difference. But I also believe you can make a difference at any time. I mean, people do major rehabilitation after a brain injury, and eventually they can form new connections. You can, it's somewhat like training muscles, right? I mean, if you exercise and train your muscles, they work a lot better than they did if you don't do that.
Right.
So I wanted to do something, and then the rest of it, there's actually a large literature showing that attention is pretty easy to train. And the interest in games came along simply because that's something children will do without being forced. We wanted the games to be fun enough that the kids would play them on their own and want to do it. A lot of the therapy that it might be helpful to kids is not a lot of fun, and so they don't engage in it all that willingly. And if we could find something they wanted to do, and during that period of time, I had the good fortune to make contact with Leanne Chukowski, and she is a vision expert, and she also had an interest in games, and so it was actually her idea to turn these games into gaze-driven games, which is extremely effective because if you have to use your eyes to play the game, then you are definitely controlling attention, and the degree to which you do that, the better you get at moving your eyes to play the game, the better your attention gets. It just kind of comes along for free. And that's one thing. And the second thing is you have to stay focused on the game. If you're playing this game with your eyes and you get distracted and your eyes move away, everything stops. The game doesn't continue. So kids can play on their own. Somebody doesn't have to stand over them and make sure that they are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. It's built into the process. And so that it kind of was a combination of developing. And then we had some challenges getting games programmed. But eventually, I think it turned out to be quite successful.
Yes. And so what, so you're training games based on what you're explaining to us, we're training games. Are we strengthening connections in the brain then? And so how is that likely to be happening?
So that's my notion. Everything is about brain function. I mean, everything you do requires brain cells communicating with other brain cells. So you get these networks of brain cells that help you pick up a glass, or throw a ball, or walk across the room, or read a book. And that's all about brain communication. And those connections can be strengthened or built by using them. And so those attentional connections that allow you to play the games, for example, the training game, move your eyes and your attention quickly from one thing to the next, are using those attention-related communication pathways in the brain. And when they do that, they get stronger. The more you use them, again, it's like training a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger that connection gets. Connections that aren't used at all die, and the cells associated with them die. And that's actually a normal developmental process, by the way, is as children get older and their brains get more efficient, a lot of the early connections and cells that they aren't using anymore fade away. And then they build longer and longer and more efficient brain communication.
Very interesting.
That's my model of what's happening. It's very hard to test, and it probably takes a long time. So I see this, for example, we started doing some of this training in older adults. Their attentional problems are a little bit different. They're much more distractible. But brains, again, are still plastic, and in order to maintain some cognitive fitness and maybe reduce chances of dementia as people get older, and our population is getting older, you can develop some things that allow you to continually exercise your brain. That's the way I think about it. So it's like brain exercise, and those things are very popular right now.
Yeah, I've heard. Well, Jeanne, thank you so much for your time. This has been very informative, and I think our listeners could learn a lot from this discussion, and hopefully they have. Is there any last parting thoughts you have for parents or educators as they're dealing with, children who might have attention challenges?
I don't think so, except that one of the things that all educators know, if they work with children who have developmental differences, is that it takes some patience and it takes time, and it takes a lot of individual attention. So each child, as I said earlier, is really a little bit different. And if you can find the key to getting that child to engage in the material, then you'll be much more successful. Of course, that is dependent upon teachers having time. And the same is true for parents. I think most parents learn that on their own by feeling their way. They find the best way to motivate their own child and help them.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks for giving me your attention for another show. We hope you learned something that you can apply right away. If you enjoyed the show, please rate us wherever you listen to your podcasts so that other people can more easily find the podcast. And remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.